Hey everyone. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to talk to you guys about Star Wars Galaxy's Edge and how it fits or doesn't fit with Disneyland Park. Now, I did a video recently on this about the theme itself. You know, does a single IP of Star Wars fit in Disneyland? Now, this video is going to be a little different than that. This is going to focus more on the scope and the style of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. You know, is it too grand of a scale? Is it too hyper themed? Are these things that are these elements that are going to clash with Walt's original park? Okay, so that's what we're going to discuss today. Let's dig right in. So, is Star Wars Galaxy's Edge too hyper themed, too immersive for Disneyland Park? My answer is no. And actually, my opinion on this has kind of evolved over the past maybe few months, 4 or 5 months. At first, I was really worried, okay, because Disneyland is a very charming, more of a cozy, quaint park, okay, compared to like, you know, the Magic Kingdom in Florida, or even parks like the Magic Kingdom in Tokyo. You know, Disneyland's a very unique place in that it feels very cozy. It's very charming. So adding this like really hyper themed, kind of majestic looking, you know, land in the very back, I was worried, is it going to mess up what Disneyland is? Okay. But then I started to think about it. What is Disneyland? Right? I mean, really think about it. Disneyland, it's changed over the years. The form and what makes up the park has changed and evolved over the years, and not just recently. It did it when Walt was alive. Okay, perfect example. And when Disneyland opened in 1955, you had areas like Fantasyland and Tomorrowland, right? And a lot of these lands were very sparse. You know, the theming was kind of kind of sparse. You know, it was here and there, and it was, Fantasyland had like a lot of carnival kind of rides, and Tomorrowland looked very empty. There wasn't really even grass in a lot of these areas of the park. Then in the 60s, when like the mid to late 60s, when Pirates came out and New Orleans Square, Walt really stepped up the theming game, really stepped up the immersion. So if you were to apply what's happening now with Star Wars Galaxy's Edge and what happened back then when Walt introduced New Orleans Square, it's the same thing. You know, he took a park that was at over here in terms of immersion, right? And he built an area with New Orleans Square and Pirates that was up here, okay? He stepped it up. So you could have made the same argument back then in the 60s. Well, does Pirates fit Disneyland? Is it the same feel as the rest of the park? No, it wasn't the same feel as the rest of the park, but Walt did it anyway. He wanted to constantly better himself and make the park better and better and better and better. So Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, is it more hyper themed than a lot of the other areas of Disneyland? Yes, it is. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what Walt wanted. He wanted Disneyland to constantly evolve and push boundaries, push limits, push the envelope. Okay? That's what they're doing. Walt did it when he built New Orleans Square, and we're doing it again with Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. And actually, even after Walt, Tony Baxter did it when he bulldozed all of Fantasyland and rebuilt it with the European style village now that we have today. That's a much different, the Fantasyland, the new Fantasyland that opened at Disneyland in the 80s is completely different than what the Fantasyland looked like when the park opened in 1955. This version, the 80s version of Fantasyland, is hyper themed, very ornate, very detailed, way more, light years beyond what the original Fantasyland was. So, you know, we're okay with that. We love the Fantasyland now. I mean, it's classic Disney now. But couldn't the same argument have been made back then about that as what people are saying now about Star Wars Land? It's too ornate, it's too detailed and too immersive. It doesn't fit the rest of the park and how the rest of the park is built and set up. The same argument could be made. So that's my opinion on it. I don't think you can ever get too immersive. too detailed, too themed at Disneyland. You constantly want to push those boundaries and set a new bar for yourself. Disneyland, the worst thing you can do for Disneyland Park, the biggest disrespect to Walt's legacy and his vision for this park. Okay, now this is very important. The biggest disrespect you can do to Walt Disney and Disneyland and his whole vision is to let this park stagnate, to keep it here. That's not what he wanted for this park. He wanted to push, better, 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 better. That's what he wanted, and that's what we're doing with Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Okay, so those are my opinions on it. You know, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge is going to be next level, hyper themed, and you're right, it's going to be a lot different in a lot of ways compared to the rest of the park, and that's a good thing. Just like New Orleans Square was much different than the rest of the park when it opened. These things, we constantly have to set a new standard, and it'll push. Now, once Galaxy's Edge opens, the new bar has been set. So when they go in for the new Fantasyland expansion, or when they go into, you know, redo Tomorrowland, that bar's up here now. That's the bar they have to meet, right? So you're constantly pushing. So those are my thoughts on it. Comment below, what do you think? Does the scale, the scope, the size, the level of immersion, is it too much for Walt Disney's quaint little charming park? Or do you agree with me in that the park is always evolving and always changing? And what is Disneyland today isn't necessarily what it was 10 years ago and 20 years ago, and isn't necessarily what it will be in 20 or 30 years. The whole idea of what this park is constantly changing and evolving. So comment below, let me know what you guys think. I love to hear from you guys. Like, subscribe. I do content on Disney all the time. And as always, may the Force be with you.